Hey Finn, so glad you're here. We've been talking a lot over the last 12 months, and yeah, I'm a big fan of whatever you're doing. You have a great mind for content, for growth. You've gone viral so many times on Reddit, and you have hacked the Hacker News front page multiple times as well. And obviously, you work with Y Combinator startups, and I'm so happy you're here. So nice to have you here, man.
Dude, awesome to be here. Yeah, thanks for the invite. Super happy
Yeah,
to be here.
absolutely. There's so much changes that we're seeing in the world today, in the tech world with AI, and everybody's like an AI startup these days. And you worked with AI startups yourself, and you've covered a lot of AI startups as well. The most recent one was the lovable growth story that you shared yesterday.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know, like, what are your thoughts around how AI first companies can create a moat for themselves in this world where every company is an AI first company? How would you go about differentiating yourself as a brand in this sea of AI startups?
Yeah, so I think like the first thing is to think about sort of like what does AI actually do? And I would say sort of like it compresses the time and effort you need for a mediocre result. And I don't mean mediocre as like an insult there, right? I just mean like an okay result. Because if you think about it, sort of like most features of most products are just pretty much okay, right? So sort of like a a company that's building a feature that is not like core to their product, probably doesn't innovate on that. They're just like, okay, we need to build that into our product. We need to build like a good enough version of this, right? And I think AI does that in a lot of ways. For example, like AI will write you a very sort of like decent article. It's never going to write you like the world's best article on a topic, but it's going to write you a decent article. How to differentiate on how to create a moat in this AI world? I think one is and this is sort of, like a bit of a cynical answer maybe, but I think like a lot of people have said sort of like AI is one of those revolutions that benefits the incumbents that have all the distribution already and a lot more than startups. And I think like part of that is true of like, if you already have distribution in whatever way that is, like you will probably reap the rewards a lot more from AI than anybody else. Another one is, as you mentioned, brand. I think if you can manage to build a brand and to actually stand out, you will probably have a much stronger brand that sort of like previous tech companies, could have had. Because I think sort of like there is this way that we're going where sort of like everything is becoming sort of like AI slop and like the mediocrity is really taking over, because it's like if you can have the good enough version in 10 seconds for free versus like hiring a copywriter or a marketing strategist for like tens of thousands of dollars sometimes, or even if it's just thousands of dollars, and then it takes 3 weeks to get to a result that's like a little bit better. Is that worth it? Probably not. So I think like everything is becoming sort of like more slopified, which I think creates the opportunity to like, if you're actually willing and ready to stand out, there actually brand can become more important. And then from a technical perspective, I think data is one of those things where if you can be a company that is creating proprietary data on something that then is useful for AI tooling, I think those companies will be very differentiated and have a very strong market position. For example, like Cursor is an example of that, right? If like Cursor in the value chain, obviously, sort of like if all the model APIs go away tomorrow, then Cursor is done, right? But it's like what Cursor has, which is extremely, extremely valuable, is they know exactly what people are trying to build and like what is still hard or difficult for the AIs. And I think that's why Cursor is extremely differentiated and has longevity compared to like some other company who is just like I don't know, turn yourself into the Simpsons kind of AI tool, which I think that's not differentiated. That doesn't generate unique data.
Yeah, very interesting points. I mean, on one, like the three themes that came out is you have the data as a moat, you have the brand as a moat, and you have there was another one I forgot. There was the unique differentiator of how you communicate the value in a unique way and going above
Yeah.
and beyond doing that. And for all of those things, I feel, and another point you mentioned was very important, was that the power law principle, where if you already have an existing distribution channel, then you're at a much greater advantage compared to the people who do not have that advantage. And so I feel like on the last point, I feel it's very important because it's like historically also we've seen that the incumbents have always won because because they're just in a stronger position to leverage the existing technology that already exists. And so even though on a surface level AI is democratizing the technology, so to speak, but it's still not there in terms of how the power users will actually use it. The incumbents will actually end up using it. And so they have this massive advantage of just like taking it up like 10, 20x compared to the average person. And so they have that massive distribution advantage here, which I feel like so as a brand, if you're just starting out, then that poses a problem. Like, okay, how do you compete with the big guys? Because you don't have any distribution, right? So how do you do that? And then it ties into your second point of building a brand. And so you have to invest more into actually creating a differentiated brand that stands for something. Maybe you're using some fancy typography. Maybe you're using some very Mid-Journey-esque kind of images that kind of set you apart or something like that. But that again takes effort. That again takes time. And so once again, from a monetary perspective, they don't have that degree of financial capital that the incumbents hold. And then again, which ties to your third point, which is the data. And they don't have any data to begin with because they're just right there. And so it's still not clear like how an early stage startup with no capital, with no distribution advantage, can actually disrupt something like that. Barring which, like there is an exception here. Like I don't know if you know, there's Cluely, and they went viral on social media just by virtue of them having a very controversial narrative around cheating while also having like a killer video game going on, and that blew up. So unless you have that narrative that is slightly controversial or whatever, just kind of blows up, and you have a channel like a video or something to kind of showcase that virality, if you don't have those, then I'm unclear how startups can actually disrupt an existing market. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that Cluely is actually a great example here, where what they did is basically they had the guts to have this like interesting narrative, right? So like, I don't know how differentiated the product is, but to say, I think they basically said sort of like, cheat on anything with our product, and I think what's interesting there is like they said basically, we're going to say the thing that nobody else is saying, right? It's like everybody knew that, like ChatGPT was being used by students to basically cheat, right? Or that probably engineers for job interviews were using AI tools to like pass technical interviews. I'm sure like everybody was aware that that was happening, right? But they just said it and they were like, okay, like we're going to be differentiated in terms of branding here, right? And I think that's something that, like most people wouldn't do because it's so safe. So then that because it's like, not because it's so safe, but it's like because most people want to be safe and they don't want the kind of backlash that comes from that, right? Because not all of their virality was positive, right? Yeah. So I think like that's part of that, of just like, are you willing to do something that like no AI would ever tell you to do? Are you willing to do something that is just so different and like take a risk, right? Because I think like if you think about AI stuff, like it does a lot of things, but what it doesn't do is take risk or recommend you to take risk ever. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I think like that's something where it's like, if you can actually take risk. And then I think something else, like I think you mentioned video, and I think there's something to that. And we also often see sort of like, websites that go viral, where it's just like they spent a ton of time building these like crazy fancy websites. And I think part of that is, you're building something that no AI could have built, which shows that you actually spent the time building this, right? And there's this theory called costly signaling, where basically the idea is that the more you can show that something cost you something and that it costs you money or effort or whatever, the more people will view it as like signal versus noise. And I think that's super important in AI, right? And it's like the classic example is like, why do people spend like thousands and thousands of dollars on like a tiny handbag, right? And it's like the actual point is if you made the handbag even smaller and even more expensive, it would probably be even viewed as even more luxurious because you show like I can spend even more money on even less. And I think that's the case with like a lot of these like super produced videos and super difficult to make websites. It's just like you're showing that like, even though, yes, you don't need to do a video like that for like a first version or for like a launch video, what you're doing is basically you're cutting through the noise and you're deciding like, okay, what we actually want to do is stand out. And the way we can do that is by being so different and showing that we are like actually human and not just taking like the first AI out.
Right. There's a lot to be said about the way that marketing has evolved, or even the whole startup game has evolved into like the packaging has become more important than the product itself. And we always heard like growing up, like don't judge a book by its cover. But that's exactly what we're doing right now. We are literally judging the product by its cover. And then if the cover isn't good, then nobody's going to open the book. And so I feel like that's where a lot of the distribution advantage, the initial momentum lies at least. I'm not sure if that translates necessarily to more MRR or more loyal customers with good retention and stuff like that, because at that point, the product will have to kind of show up and live to that promise, because then it kind of goes down. But that initial momentum, I feel, would lend a certain degree of credibility to that entire product to get those initial users in, get those investors, piling in the money and stuff like that. Which kind of leads me to my next question in terms of, so we have this initial momentum, right, from the videos, from the websites, those fancy looking websites and stuff. Now, let's say that the video has gone viral, they have a ton of users and stuff like that. Now, how would you, since you've gone viral on Reddit, on Hacker News and stuff like that, what are some practical things that a company can do or an individual can do working at a company to make sure that this momentum kind of sticks around? That, okay, they've gone viral once on Twitter, like with a video or a landing page or whatever. How do you sustain that consistently by creating content that, gets those impressions week in, week out? Because if you can crack that, then you have nailed distribution. And obviously, I'm speaking from experience here, like you've gone viral multiple times as well on Reddit and on Hacker News. So how do you reverse engineer that virality, and how do you make sure that it goes out time and time again, it performs each time? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so I think there's two aspects to this question. One is like, how do you as a company sort of like set up programs to keep it going? And then the other sort of like specifically on content. I can start with the content angle. What I would always say is, like, if you're playing this game versus like an SEO type game, like, I don't think anybody has like a 100% success rate. Right? The problem is that you can never predict this, right? It's like you could get banned from a subreddit, or just like people on Hacker News might hate your stuff, or like wherever else you post, like LinkedIn, there's just a chance that things don't work. And that's always there. So like the mental model always needs to be like, if I do this piece of content, like if I do any given piece of content, I need to be able to make the case for like, oh, why should this go viral? And then assume I have a 20% success chance of it actually going viral. So it's like, I need to be, I was like, if I need to like write the least viral post, I would make it about, like, I don't know, like a generic AI generated SEO article about, parking garage infrastructure providers. It's like, that's like something that is guaranteed to not go viral. So it's like, what is the opposite of that? Is probably starting with something that people are paying attention to, right? And like, maybe that's paying attention to the news, whether that's tech news or something else, and writing on that. Maybe it's like a controversial take on a topic that's often discussed, maybe it's like a comment on some other piece of content that's going viral. Things of that nature, where it's just like, those are the types of things that let me make the case that something can go viral. And then, of course, there's also, if we're assuming we're like early stage startups, like we probably don't have like a big distribution channel. So it's like, can we interview people who have big distribution channels? And then maybe they engage, right? It's like, can we involve like other companies or influencers that we can tag, and maybe they engage and they say thank you, and then you show up to all of their fans, right? Yeah. It's like, those are like a few tactics that help you, that can sort of like help you make the case for why you should go viral. And then I think the next aspect of that is also, you want it to be a flywheel. You don't want to start from scratch every time, right? So it's like, if I get, like, let's just say I post something, 1,000 people see it tomorrow. That's great. Like, that's awesome for me. But there's also the problem of, like, if I'm capturing no emails or no followers or whatever the case may be, I think you run into the problem of you start from zero every single time. Whereas what you ideally want is, you want to get distribution by going viral, by posting something, whatever the case may be. You want to get distribution, and then that becomes sort of like part of your default distribution. So it's like, you have 10 followers. Ideally, that gets shown to 10 followers, and then you have like a baseline. You just keep going up on the baseline, which is harder now that with the way that algorithms are working, but it's still possible with email. Right. And on the other side of that is sort of like, which programs should you set up, right? There's also the case to be made for creating an SEO program, right? Of like capturing more inbound deals. But I think a lot of those things are very category specific in terms of like what channels you should actually use.
Yeah. Speaking of SEO, like SEO is going through a massive shift right now with AEO and GEO coming in and stuff. You've been working at Lago for a while now, and you were experimenting with LinkedIn articles a lot, and you also were posting on Reddit, which also is a great way to kind of get those LLMs to show up. I mean, in that case, you don't really need to go viral a lot. Like, you can just post maybe like a Bofu type of content on Reddit, And then the LLMs will naturally scrape that because it's very specific in terms of the user query. So they just pick that up. And I was talking with a person the other day, and he basically wrote like a very simple tool, like how, like, these are the top 5, X tools in Y category. And this is what I found. And then they listed down like 5 or 10 of these, products. And and that entire post was scraped by ChatGPT, and it was referenced in the sources tab that ChatGPT has. And so that got like 2 upvotes. It didn't do well at all, but it was still referenced, which is the important part. So there's something to be said about not having to go viral every single time. That's probably one play. And then there's other play of like the AEO, GEO angle of the SEO that's evolved right now. So I'm curious to know what you think about the SEO play and how startups can kind of leverage this channel. How much of a role do LinkedIn articles play? How much of a role does Reddit play? Does a role does Substack play? Or even like generic articles written by AI, and you just like have a human in the loop system, and how does that process work? Like there are multiple components to it. So I'm curious to know what you think of this.
Yeah, so I would generally start out by saying sort of like, I would say AI SEO or whatever, GEO, whatever we want to call it, is very driven, or like is very difficult to figure out exactly. Like I think anybody who's telling you like, here's exactly what works, right? It's like back in the day, people would publish like, here's the 258 ranking factors on Google. It's like, I don't think any of that exists for AI SEO at the moment. So I think this isn't like a solved thing, which also means that it's like, it's both easier and harder to compete because you need to figure out what to do, but it's also like the wins can roll in a lot quicker. Whereas I feel like SEO, sort of like Google search, is very like everybody knows what game to play, and it's all about execution, right? So I think with AI SEO, like the different channels, like we've seen LinkedIn articles do well, we've like improved on like Reddit comments and stuff like that. We've also seen our own blog included quite a lot in different search queries. So I think like all of those things works. Substack itself, I've not seen as like a large common source. But it could also be because we're just like doing very different content there that doesn't like specifically answer any like AI driven questions, right?
Right.
The way that I would say is very, very different is in the sense that basically in Google search, what you want is you want to drive traffic, right? It's like you want to be up in the search rankings. Somebody clicks on your piece, reads it, maybe signs up for a newsletter, whatever. And you can sort of like take them from one funnel stage to the next through that article. And I think in LLM search, sort of like everybody's accepted that you're not doing this for traffic, right? It's like how many people in a Perplexity or like ChatGPT search click on sources and then like find which one they want. Like, I'm sure it's not 0 people, but it's like not a common behavior. So I think in AI search, people always said this in Google SEO, where it was like, you're only writing for like Google. You're not writing for the human. Like all the content sucks. And it's like in AI SEO, that is literally true, right? It's like what you want is you want to be included in the output, which means basically you want to become part of the prompt that then gets written for the end user.
Right.
And this is like a very, very different way of operating where, for example, right, it's like back in the day, you could have like, let's just say you run a analytics company and, you would have like an adjacent topic like user persona. And you do like an explainer article. Back in the day, that would be quite valuable because somebody Googling for that probably somewhere along the buyer journey for analytics software. They would click and then you could actually say how you have like a persona feature in your analytics software and maybe they sign up, right? Now, if you have that same article and somebody makes a ChatGPT query for user personas and your article gets included, like, does it do anything for you? Like, is that worth anything? I don't know, because you're not getting mentioned and nobody's clicking through to the sources. So that's like a question of like, are the top of funnel keywords even that useful anymore? I don't know, right? And like that's where we're at, where I think AI SEO is like a lot of it is just we have to figure out what's actually working because there's not the clear playbook.
Yeah. So more bottom of the funnel, would you say, like, is more AI domain centric?
I mean, if you want to like drive leads to a business, right? Like it's nice if you can be included in stuff and like have good information be surfaced to the user. But it's like for me, if I'm like a growth operator and my KPI is like how many leads is my work generating, do I care? Like not really.
And in terms of creating, you mentioned that a lot of Lago's blog posts are sourced up in ChatGPT in terms of the user queries. So what kind of keywords are you optimizing for there in terms of user query? What is your workflow like? Is it like AI generated and like you kind of come in and edit? Like what is the process like? Like walk me through that entire thing.
Yeah, so we select sort of like queries which are typically around our category or like adjacent topics, right? And it's like I think they're not very different from sort of like what you would ask for in Google SEO. Obviously, like in Google SEO, the terms are a bit more structured, shall we say? Whereas in LLM SEO, they're a lot more sort of like the user says it in their exact words. But yeah, I think like they're very similar topics to what we're talking about. And how does it work? Yeah, so I'm currently building sort of an LLM AI agent that can like take a bunch of topics, run them through like a system prompted LLM, and then immediately put that into our CMS. And currently, so we're currently testing that. And previously what we did or what we're currently doing is like that whole process, but manually, right? So like I would drive a topic, I have a customized GPT, I run that topic through that, copy that into our CMS, do editing, create a banner image, post it, and done. So
Right.
yeah, that's the current process.
So there's another question that comes up here a lot is that, so if the AI is generating content, and I'm assuming like, let's say you're building an agent in like, NA10 or Zapier or whatever, and you're building one, and the agent has like 3 tabs, right? It has the model, it has the tool, it has the memory, and you give the system prompt, like whatever, like write this stuff. And like maybe there's also a node that kind of goes into Google, Perplexity, whatever, does this research based on which it writes its output. Actually, researching from the internet, taking the sources from the internet, all the data sets, and then kind of creating a new output based on that. So it's kind of repurposing a lot of the existing information out there. And so the question becomes like, how valuable is that? Like, do LLMs actually pick that up because it's not necessarily novel, or does it still work just by virtue of it being like, okay, it's a new article? So how does that function?
Yeah, so this is like something that we're questioning as well. Like it is not easy to figure this out, right? Because it's like, yes, we have had some of that content like included in search, right? And like I think the question is always for LLMs, like they want very structured kind of like articles. They basically want like, what is the exact question? Okay, let me like find the answer and post it. Of course, right? It's like, let's just say we had like, if everybody's doing what we're doing, basically you end up with, 20 times the same article, right? Because it's like everybody's going to be using the same examples. And then which one is like an LLM going to choose to include? I don't know, right? I also don't know if all the LLMs will read all of the articles just to find something new, or if they will just sort of like choose whichever one is best optimized for LLMs. So yeah, I think this is like a difficult question to answer. Of course, like the question of like how valuable is this is difficult to answer because obviously it's not the most like novel. We're not creating new data for the scientific corpus of knowledge of the world. At the same time, like it's also been the same for like Google content the whole time. It's like if you like most people were using the same examples because most of the time you wrote an SEO article, somebody was like, hey, can you write me an article about this? And the writer would go out and they would read like the first 5 articles on that topic and use that to synthesize their own. So like, I don't know how different that is really.
That is also true. That's very true. And at the same time, I also feel like when you're creating novel content, there's this whole narrative around bringing in subject matter experts, like they could lend their own unique touch, so to speak. And maybe they're onboarding experts, maybe they're billing experts and stuff like that. And so that lends them a bit of credibility. And on top of that, if they have like an existing social media presence as an influencer or whatever, and they're kind of sharing their thoughts out there, it just makes that much more credible. I feel like that again ties up to your first point that you mentioned about distribution being like a competitive advantage if you already have like an existing audience. So it's very interesting how that ties up here as well. Very interesting. I would love to see the workflow that you've built on NA10. If you can share a template, that'd be great.
Yeah, once we finalize it and like we're running it into production, I'm definitely happy to share.
Awesome. And finally, like what is your preferred tech stack? Like how do you use AI in your daily workflow? Like both professionally and personally, what does your tech stack look like, and how like do you spend time actually learning about AI each day? Because it's like coming so fast, like you can't catch up. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's impossible to know every single tool all the time. And it's like, and it's also hard to get sort of like to find the right balance between yes, we should like be trying new tools, but sometimes it's also if it's a workflow that takes you half an hour versus spending 10 hours learning a tool and setting up a workflow like to automate that, right? It's like actually the payoff period for that is pretty long. So yeah, like personally, I'm just like obviously ChatGPT power user, just like I'm in there all day and I have like a bunch of custom things set up where And I think that's actually super important of like actually customizing and actually spending time writing really good system prompts and things of that nature, and not using stock ChatGPT for a lot of things, right? Because if you, I think like a good way of thinking about this is like as if it's like if you were talking to a human, right? It's like, and you're like, hey, I have like an intern or like a junior person, and suddenly you're telling them, hey, like I now want you to write social media content. They would be like what would they ask you? They would ask you, okay, like whose social media content do you like? You know, like is there like what goal do you have with this? Like what is your KPIs and like all that kind of stuff. And surprisingly few people do that for ChatGPT actually, and like actually customize what they build. So like I have like a lot of custom GPTs. Then I use N8N. And so, I mean, it's not like an AI tool in terms of like workflow automation, but we use like Athena, which is like an Ahrefs kind of thing for AI. And then personally, I use Rosebud, which is like a AI powered journaling app. And but I'm also always like trying out new tools here and there.
Yeah, like Perplexity and Claude Code. Have you tried out any of those, like Claude Code or Perplexity Labs?
Perplexity Labs, I have not. Perplexity is my default search.
It has replaced Google.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think I literally go to google.com now if I need to make a Google search, because it's so like, it's just for navigational searches, right? It's like if I want to, if I need the pricing page of OpenAI, like I will put OpenAI I will put OpenAI pricing into Google. But if I'm just like, what are like AI pricing strategies? Like, why would I waste my time like Googling that and then clicking on 5 different articles? I can have Perplexity do that same thing.
Right. Speaking of pricing, like obviously you're at Lago, which is like a usage-based billing platform. And you obviously wrote that beautiful piece yesterday on Lovable. And I'm curious to know, in terms of pricing, how do you feel like AI-first companies are going to go about their pricing? Because we've seen like a huge shift. Like earlier it was like free freemium. Some of them is usage-based. Some of them are outcome-based. And there's a whole bunch of things. Like there are AI agents that kind of do a task, and some of them charge based on the task completed. Some of them charge based on the number of conversations or chats you're having, like Lovable does, like credits and stuff. So I'm curious, like, how do you, like, what are the different, like, I feel there's a spectrum here. So what do you think about that spectrum in terms of billing and pricing, and how companies can move forward, AI first companies can move forward with that spectrum in mind?
Yeah. So I think like to start with, the main reason that these like freemium and product-led growth models like worked in the first place was that like each individual bit of usage was basically free, right? It's like marginal costs were zero, which was basically, like even if you have a massive cloud bill, like dividing each bit of usage by that would eventually lead you to a number that would effectively be zero. It would be too low to be calculating. So that's why you could have these like forever free plans and like all that kind of stuff. And also why you had like margins of like 80, 90%, gross margins at least. And with AI, that's changing, right? It's like with AI, each bit of usage, each token, each image generation, whatever the case may be, actually costs you something. And that is like not a cost not worth measuring. That cost can actually be quite high, right? So I think this is why we're seeing like a transition towards versions of usage-based pricing. And usage-based pricing doesn't have to mean what it used to mean of like you're paying by the token or you're paying by the whatever, right? It could also be you're paying a subscription, and that subscription includes this amount of usage, and after that it's whatever dollars, whatever cents per. Or it could be credit-based pricing, right? Which is like a similar way of doing that, but like credits can be spent differently and maybe they roll over into the next month, whatever the case may be. So I think the pricing is broadly going towards more restricted usage simply because gross margins are not that high anymore. And because each bit of usage like costs you something. So that's like the shift that we're seeing broadly. And of course, like that creates new pricing models, right? For example, you mentioned sort of like outcome-based pricing, which is, like the most famous example of that is like Intercom doing this chatbot that instead of like charging per month, you charge per like resolved ticket. And I think like that is, in theory, that's sort of like the perfect pricing model, because you only pay for what you only pay for not only what you use, but you only pay for what you actually get the result that you want from. And I think like in theory, that's true, right? But in practice, this is actually extremely hard because, for example, right, it's like, how do you know that you have like resolved a customer issue? For example, if a user talks to the AI chatbot and they're so frustrated they close the chat, does that mean the ticket is resolved? Or does that just mean you've just massively lowered your NPS with that person because they're super frustrated with the support experience, right? So it's like, it's hard to do attribution there. And then it's also extremely difficult to think about that pricing model more broadly. Because when we think about that pricing model, it's very difficult to actually find out where it would work, because you basically need something where it's always better to do more of that. And there is there's like a finite amount of work, right? So, and like with support ticket, that's true. Like if you are at 0 support tickets to resolve, like, okay, problem solved. Awesome. And like you will never have like infinity support tickets, right? Yeah. But like if you think about like AI agent pricing, let's take like SDR, AI SDR, that's like a popular thing. And let's imagine that was charged by the booked meeting, right? Like that space already, and it's already a pretty bounded space, is so much bigger, right? Because it's like, first of all, telling an AI, okay, book me some meetings, send a bunch of messages, that could work, but it's like, how do you actually make sure they're qualified? And you need to build that infrastructure. And the more autonomy you give it, the harder that's going to be to maintain that quality, right? And it's like, when does it stop? Does it just message every single LinkedIn user over the course of time? Is that how it's going to be? Because, obviously, if you're giving the AI an incentive to book meetings, it will do whatever it can to book meetings. And so we see like even there's like a lot of complexity that's arising. And the qualitative differences between outcomes are so much more different. And SDR is a typical work that would get paid by commissions, which is like outcome-based pricing. And then we can go even further on that, right? It's like, imagine like HR, right? It's like there's not like a number that HR is supposed to get up, There's it's not like, oh, if you just perform this outcome this many more times, you will have done a better job, right? And like even with, I don't know, social media marketing, right? It's like, if you just maximize for engagement, okay, sure. Like you can become a meme page. You can post like, like you can repost Trump tweets or whatever. It's like, that's probably not what you want to do. But it's like, if you strictly maximize for engagement, that's what's going to happen. So I think that's why sort of like outcome-based pricing it's definitely an interesting model. And I definitely think it's going to spread to a few use cases, but I don't think it will be sort of like as ubiquitous as seat-based pricing or stuff like that was like enabled by the cloud revolution.
Yeah, you make a good point. I was coming across this tool called Valley, and they were doing a lot of LinkedIn-based outbound reach. And they were kind of positioned in a way that they were complementary to AI SDR, which like who was booking meetings on autopilot, but there was nothing fixed for LinkedIn. And a lot of people were questioning what is the quality of the output that's coming in from AI SDR, like you mentioned. And so Valley then kind of added that infrastructure at the bottom, wherein like a prospect would visit your website, which shows that they have shown intent. So that's like, okay, that's great. And then the agent then kind of scrapes their data, like using Clearbit. I don't know what API they're using, but it essentially scrapes their data, their LinkedIn profile, and then sends them automated outbound messages saying that, hey, you just checked out our website. Here's our pricing, whatever. How can I help you with? So I feel like that's more qualified in a sense. Like it's actually targeting people who have shown interest in your website. But then again, it's like, even there's a spectrum, right? You can't expect that 100% of all people that are coming in actually want to buy something from you or are interested. They might just be curious. They might not necessarily be buyers. So I feel like there's another layer there to be unpacked where, okay, how do you actually qualify them? That, okay, are they just casually visiting or are they actually looking to buy? Because you don't want to waste time, spending compute on people who aren't ready to buy yet. And so I feel like there's another layer there to be done as well. And yeah, I'm very curious to see how this pans out, like in terms of outcome-based pricing, because the word outcome is very generic. It's not defined yet. Like it's defined, but it's also kind of undefined. And so yeah, I'm curious to see how this pans out as well. But yeah, I'm glad you shared your thoughts on that. It's a very interesting space for sure. And Lago is doing some good work there as well.
Yeah, and I think like just to add on that, I think it's also, like obviously from the company side, it's also a risk, right? If just like if you consume more, if Intercom consumed more than 99 cents worth of tokens, they would be losing money on that interaction.
Yeah.
Plus, it's also like Intercom already has all of that data, right? It's like they are the incumbent who can just like roll out that solution to a bunch of customers, which would be a lot harder for like somebody who's running a chatbot who's selling an AI customer support chatbot who doesn't have access to literally all of the tickets that their customers have. And yeah, as you said, right, it's like I think the closer you can bound these like outcome-based pricing things, the better they're going to actually work, and the less you're going to be stuck in sort of like some conflict resolution because a customer got charged for something that they didn't agree, right? Because it's like if we play that further of like, okay, only people who visit the website should be reached out to, right? It's like, and maybe you bound that even further, like only companies only people who visited the website 3 or more times, who are from companies with X million in funding, only reach out to those. And then you're probably getting pretty close to somewhere where you're like confident that this is an outcome that you could charge for.
Yeah, that's true. The riches is in the niches. It's still true here. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And finally, the last question, it's an existential one. So what advice would you give to 20-year-old Finn, who's young, out of college or whatever? And what advice would you give to 40-year-old Finn, who is, more wise, with a lot of gray hair and stuff? So what would you give? What would be your words of advice to both those folks?
Would you say do you mean specifically to career and tech stuff, or?
In general, like life advice, career advice, like it can be both.
I think like 20-year-old, I would just say like, figure your like personal stuff out. Because I think like, I started a business when I was 18, like a freelance business. And that, I think like in many ways, obviously it taught me many things. It taught me how to operate by myself. It taught me, like copywriting. It, like really showed me of like, yeah, you can make something happen in the world. But I think it was also like a way to escape from sort of like other types of growth that I should have experienced in that time when I was a freelancer. So I think like that's something where like I wish I would have taken more time for, because in reality I was sort of like, like basically being a workaholic of like not wanting to deal with certain things and like filling that time with work. So I think like that would be the main piece of advice that I would give. And yeah, I would also tell him, like, if you have injuries, take those seriously and like actually recover from them, because now I have like bad joints. And yeah, I think what else would I say? I would also just say like, I think like most of the advice I would give would be more around sort of like relationships, both like personal and work wise, of just like, really taking that, really like treasuring that as much as it should be valued. And yeah, and I think this is something that like most people would say to their younger self, but it's like, there's so many things that looking back that you were like so obsessed with and looking back didn't matter at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I would just say like, okay, like stop worrying about so many things. Right. And then 40-year-old me, I think something that I would like to not lose, because like, in an ideal world, I will have kids and whatnot and a house and stuff. I would just say like, don't lose like writing, don't lose like having a creative outlet. I would also say, like I would also tell myself to keep reading. So if like, I think like reading, writing, and maybe cooking are sort of like the things that give me the most happiness. So I would just say like, yeah, like I hope you're still doing that, And yeah, I think like if I had to give advice to him now, to like an older version of me, I would also just say like, yeah, I hope that you have like that you're like still taking the time for yourself, even if you have like a life that's more settled, maybe with kids, maybe with a house and stuff like that. Like, I hope you're still like taking that time for like the things that you love. Yeah.
That's sweet. Thank you so much for sharing, Finn. This was fantastic. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Catch up soon. Bye-bye.
Let's talk soon.